Hi there, friends. We're back with another video here on paying it forward. Thanks for all the feedback I've been getting about the videos, super helpful. One of the things that I wanted to talk about today was going back to the topic of Azure DevOps again. And in this particular example, it was to focus on building custom processes. Custom processes, you might ask, why would I want one of those? Well, sometimes when it comes to engineering and engineering teams working together, it can often be hard to find a programmatic way of reporting progress to their stakeholders. So using a custom process, you can actually build additional items or work items on top of your existing ones. Let's say the general ones that are in there: epics, features, user stories, and tasks. And then you can use those work items to communicate status and progress to your stakeholders in a more effective way than having to, for example, go outside of Azure DevOps and then do a lot of additional work on top. So with that, let's jump straight into the agenda. So this is what we're going to cover today. The first thing is what is an Azure DevOps process? Why would I want to use one? How to set up a process? And how to configure your Azure DevOps project to leverage the process. So what we'll do is we'll use a scenario, an example scenario, and we'll build a process around that in that step. So first of all, let's move into what is an Azure DevOps process. So an Azure DevOps process, fundamentally, it governs the work items that would be used within a project. So inside of Azure DevOps, there's four, let's say, default processes that are available out of the box. And when you first set up a new organization in Azure DevOps, it defaults to what's called the basic process. The one that I and my peers and teams at Microsoft use the most common is what's called the Agile Process, which contains the work items you can see on the screen here. So you've got a bug, which is, let's say, a bug, an epic, feature, task, issue, user story, and so on and so forth. And all of these are, let's say, generally used by engineering teams to structure the work and the input of work that they would receive so that they can then prioritize that work through a sprint, for example. And I would say, in terms of taking that one step further, the Agile process that we use, the typical, let's say, way that these work items are organized is that you have a single epic, which can have multiple features, that feature can then have multiple user stories, and that user story can have multiple tasks. So the idea being here, that let's paint this with an example. So the epic could be developing application A, let's call it for now. Let's make something up. Let's call it an application that's going to be used for ordering food. So food is often close to my mind. Let's say that the features that you'd want to have that would be an interface for making the order, an interface for viewing progress of the order. Then within those two features, you would then have user stories. So you would say, as a hungry customer called Peter, I want to be able to make an order so that I can get my food. And that's a very generic user story, but I'm just giving an example. And then when it comes to selecting that user story for development in the backlog, then it would be a case of what tasks would it take to create that to create that user story, which then rolls up to delivering the feature. But as I mentioned, sometimes it can be difficult when you want to report on the progress of a project, because this is really like product and engineering team focused taxonomy. And teams are very familiar with this, but not always business users. So there can sometimes be an opportunity to kind of take this, let's say, existing process and customize it so that you can provide an ability for other stakeholders to understand what's going on in the engineering sprint. So the scenario I'm going to give here is like we have business stakeholders who want to see how the engineering work rolls up to their strategic or business focused initiatives. To do this, we'll create work items that are specifically designed for stakeholder communication, making it easier for the non-technical team members to engage in the development process without them having to go through and read all of the epics, features, user stories, and tasks. So in this case, we're designing 2 additional work items that we want to be in the process on top of the standard ones. The first one, a business initiative, and the second one being a work stream. Let's just talk about those for one moment to kind of extend them out a little bit further. So the one before, which was to say an application that would be, for example, for ordering food, that could be for, let's say, a delivery company business. And they may have multiple, let's say, streams of their business that they're focusing on. And one of them is to, let's say, grow users of their delivery service in the food sector by 20% by the end of the calendar year. That would be, for example, a business initiative, something that's quite broad and vague, which you wouldn't typically see in an engineering backlog. And then maybe perhaps there's certain initiatives or work streams that the business would then, initiate to go and solve for that initiative of growing their business by 20% in that area. So it could be, for example, that one of them is to, have increased their foothold on the food delivery sector. One of them could be on the package delivery sector. These could be examples of work streams, which again are a business-focused approach to how they determine how to solve the initiative. But ultimately, it's then providing that clarity that the work that's being done in the backlog actually rolls back up to one of those things. So to take this scenario a little bit further, these are, let's say, the kind of details that I would need to have on the customized work items. Again, that isn't standard in a backlog that you would normally have. Again, these are kind of things that are specific to the business, like the amount of budget needed or that's been allocated for that business initiative, the team that's been assigned, the priority of the initiative from a high, medium, and low, and then on the work stream side, when's it due? What's the budget amount, and what's the function of the team that's working on that work stream, if in case you're using it with having multiple teams being involved. What we would expect then that this may look like, if we wanted to kind of align that, the approach of the existing Agile process, but with the customization of the business initiative and work stream on top of it, it would kind of come to look like something like this. So what's the best thing to do now that we've got this is to develop it. Let's go build it. All right, so now we're in the Azure DevOps that I've used before for these kind of demos that we're using. And we need to find, first of all, where the processes are in the organization. So the first thing to know is that they're not contained within the individual projects themselves. They're actually contained on the organizational level. So you would, of course, need to have that kind of permission, first of all, to be able to adjust these processes. I think you need to be in the administrator group in terms of permissions. So I'm hitting here on the organization settings, and then if I come up here, you'll see just below the boards section, you can then see that there's the process. So if we just zoom in, we have the boards section where the process is here. So let's jump into the process. As you can see at the top here, we have a number of processes that are all default in terms of them being set up when you first set up your organization in Azure DevOps. I mentioned before that basic is the one that's defaulted when you first set up your organization, but it has very few work items within it. It has an epic, an issue, and a task. So again, for our teams that I'm in, we tend to use Agile, and that's why I always shift it to being default, which you do by hitting the three buttons here. All right, but if we want to make customizations to this process, how do we do that? So what we want to do is hit the three dots here and then create what's called an inherited process. So inherited in that it takes the existing work items that are set in the Agile process. You can see here it's locked, and it then allows you to customize it somewhat. So we're going to create an inherited process, and we're going to call this paying it forward. So you can now see I have the inherited process underneath it. And if I click into it, first of all, it looks identical to the Agile process. So it has the same work items, everything is the same. But the big difference is that if I go here, you can see I can actually create a new work item type. So what we're going to do is create the 2 work items that we mentioned before. The first one of those we're going to do is the business initiative. So we're just going to type it in here. We're going to select a nice icon, which will be like this little, let's put a flame with the black color, same as the icon that we've got. We'll create that one. And then you can see we come into this screen, which allows us to then add fields to the work item. There are some other areas over here on the right that are typically found in engineering work items, which I don't want to see. So I want to kind of customize the view to make it more, let's say, appealing or easy for a non-engineering stakeholder to have a look at the item. Then I have some other fields that I want to add. So what I'm going to do is I've got here the budget amount, the team assigned, and the initiative priority that I need to add. So the first one I'm going to do is I'm going to add a field in this middle section over here, which I'm going to call the initiative priority. So, and this is a choice. So this would be high, medium, and low. So if I'm going to come here, I'm going to do a pick list, and then I can just add the items here. One suggestion I would have is to put a number in front first, because then it organizes them in numerically. Because it would normally do it alphabetically if you do it with the numbers, and that can sometimes, let's say, not be the best user experience. So actually putting in the numbers after each is a good way of doing it. There are some other options that we can set. So you could have, for example, making it required, and you could actually select a default value if you wanted to, and you can even allow users to enter their own values as well. And then it asks where you want to create this within, or you can change the actual label. So there's 2 parts here. One of them is actually the field's name, and one of them is how it's presented. So if I just wanted to simplify this to init priority like that in terms of the naming convention, then I can then change this one to actually align to how I want it to be. What's important to note here is that if you're using this, let's say, work item in a Power BI dashboard, for example, the name that you will need to look up is the one that's defined here. So this would be the name that you would be getting in the system. Okay, I'm going to add it to a new group, which I'm just going to call initiative measures. Okay, and you can see now in the middle here I have this pick list, which is a string. I've got a couple more fields that I need to add, so I'm going to add another one here as well, which is another new field, which is the team assigned. And again, I'm going to select the amount, the one here, which is the pick list, and I'm going to do team 1, team 2, team 3. Again, I can have a quick look, make this one required. And then you can see, you can select the group where it would fall under. In this case, that's in the initiative measures group. Okay, and the last one I want to have is the budget. So I'm going to also do that over here as well, which is the budget. And because the budget amount is a number, I want to use a decimal in this particular case so that it would capture it and the number. So that, again, I have the right formatting when I get an amount that's written into the field. Let's check the other details, see that it's all okay. I can then add the field. And then now I've got my first thing set up in the system. So you can basically see here I have a business initiative. If I go into the project right now, and this is kind of a good little test, if I go in here and try to create a work item, you'll see it doesn't show up in the list. And it's kind of like, why doesn't it show up? And it's because you need to adjust your project so that it's using that process. And how you do that is you'll see here it says Agile has got one a project assigned to it, whereas paying it forward has 0. So we click here where the team projects are, hit the 3 dots, change the process, and then you can basically change the target process that it would be leveraging. So you can see it's now using that process, and Agile doesn't have any anymore. So if I go back to my project here, I come into the work items, create a new work item. You can now see I'm able to create a business initiative. And you can see it tells me the initiative priority and which team is assigned. And then I can enter, for example, an amount here. It's missing a title, test 1. So now you can see I'm able to create a new work item, which would be a business initiative with the measures that I want to have. Let's quickly complete the process by adding the additional workstream work item as well. So we can do that. We're going to adjust the color here, and we're going to give it a little car just because it looks nice. And in this one, we're going to add the due date. And on this one, we have a date and time that we can use. So again, there's field types that you can try out and get used to. You can set the initial date as the current date. So it says that's already used in the system. So let's just put it like date due. And then we can basically change it here to due date. So again, the label is just a representation of the data. It's not actually, it's not the actual field in the database that's using to store the value. So we've got due date. We're going to rename this one. So we're going to change it from custom to workstream details. You can see here, you can select where you want that group to show up. I like it over here. I'm going to re-hide these parts again, just to keep the layout nice and clean. I'm going to create those additional ones. So the good point here is that sometimes you can use an existing field if you've already created it. So in this case, I purposefully put the budget in there because I wanted to have the budget number being present in the system so that we could use it in both places. And you can see the budget field has been added as well. And in this case, it's kind of a good practice, let's say best practice, not to have multiple fields called the same thing, because when you're trying to leverage those for doing, let's say, making a visual to represent your data later on, it can often be difficult to kind of remember which field is for which one. So using common fields that are present across the different, let's say, work items is a good practice, and kind of mapping those out up front will be helpful as well. That's why I'd done that before in the PowerPoint file to kind of show that. So let's add the last one, which would be the team function. And I'm going to make this into a pick list. Again, I'm going to put here engineering, design and marketing. Press enter. Add that field, and then basically we have the work items set up now. There's one thing I'm going to show you that happens, so we'll just do a quick test. You can see I can now see the work stream as well. And you can see that it's set the due date for the time that I'm recording the video now as well. So there's one thing that I want to show you that can sometimes be useful, but we haven't actually looked at yet, which is using the backlog to basically view the overview of the items. So typically in a backlog, you would have the ability to see and navigate the work that you have planned. In terms of, in this case, here we see all of these existing user stories and tasks that I've created. But in this case, as we mentioned in the slide before, we want to see the business initiative and workstream being parents of the Epic feature user story and task. So the way we're going to do that is we need to go back to configuring the process again. So if we come back to the process, paying it forward, you'll see here you have what's called backlog levels. And as you can see at the moment, the business initiative and workstream are not associated to a backlog level. So to be able to view them in the backlog, you need to set at which level would they be. So in this case, they're both on the portfolio backlog level. So we're going to add them up there. The way we do that is that we hit new portfolio backlog, and then we include both the work stream and the business initiative. We're going to give this a cool color like black, and we're going to call this paying it forward. And the default work item for this level is a business initiative, which is the most, let's say, it's the highest level at which you would have in the process. So it would be like the parent of everything. And when you have this, you can then basically see that you have a level of viewing the backlog that has these two work items contained within it. What this then translates to, if we then, do create a couple of work items, I'll just quickly do that in the background. So I've done a bit of work item setup in the background, and we're now going to come to the backlog. And what we can basically do is if we hit the configure team settings, we can actually apply the backlog navigation level of paying it forward as well. And when we save and close this one, if we then come, sometimes you have to do this twice. It seems to be like a bug in the system. Once you come here, you can then select this level. And what we can now see in this very short example, if I just make it a bit wider, if we now extend this, we can see like we have the business initiative, we then have the work stream, we have an epic, a feature, user story, and then associated tasks. So we've basically been able to replicate that ability to see the relationships between the various different work that's going on in the system, and how that rolls back up to the way that the business or other stakeholders would want to look at it, by making those small changes to the process and building a custom process for our own use case. Let's do a quick summary of what we've covered today. So what we looked at was basically how to build a custom process inside of Azure DevOps. And you do that by coming into the organization settings, hitting your process, creating an inherited process, and then using that to then add the type of new work items that you would need to use. Some important points of note is being able to clearly set out the relationships that you want to have between your work items that you're planning to build up front, being able to set all of the data model or kind of the key fields that you want to have in the system so that you don't create data duplication or unnecessary fields as you move forward. I just want to take a moment to say thanks for joining this particular video today. I hope you found it useful and interesting. And as ever, don't forget to subscribe, like, and make a comment down below. It seems like this Azure DevOps series is pretty popular on YouTube. Got quite some views on those videos. So if there is anything else in particular you'd like me to talk about or explain moving forward, don't hesitate to give me a shout and let me know. Thanks so much for watching. Don't forget to pay it forward.